one thing is essential. To accelerate decisions, you need innovation that fits the mission. We innovate from AI to zero trust. We integrate using open APIs that you control. We automate with smart solutions so warfighters know and act faster. Your mission, accelerated. Tomorrow's challenges, anticipated. Win faster with Booz Allen.
Hello and welcome to the Emerging Tech Horizons podcast. I'm Arun Serafin, Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute. NDIA's recent Emerging Technologies Conference highlighted the important role that allies and partners will be playing in developing, building, and deploying the emerging technologies of the future. We saw that in the remarks of most of our keynote speakers, including Deputy Secretary Hicks, Undersecretary Hsu, Undersecretary LaPlante, and of course, General Cavoli, the EUCOM and NATO commander. We also heard it from many of the representatives, both from the Pentagon and of the partner nations who were present at the event. Today, we're going to do a deep dive on that role of allies and partners by talking about a case study that ETI has been working on of how we could potentially work with an ally, a new NATO ally, Estonia. The key findings from a case study on Estonia's defense tech ecosystems are going to be published in an upcoming report to be published by ETI. My guest today is the author of that case study and our collaborator at ETI, Mr. Joel Burke. Joel is an author and a policy researcher. In 2022 and 2023, he served as a fellow in Congress, where he worked on tech policy issues, most recently supporting Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota on AI policy issues. His forthcoming book is about Estonia's innovation and security ecosystem post their re-independence, and he collaborated with ETI on this research brief that we're going to talk about a little bit here, which is focused on Estonia and its role as a defense innovation and technology partner for the United States. Joel, thanks for joining us on our podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So Joel, let's just start with very basics. First, tell us a little bit more about your background and how you started working on Estonia.
Yeah. So my background is a little all over the place. I started my career in early stage tech and basically was early on at a company right after they graduated YC and had stayed there for a couple of years. And then I managed to make my way to Europe, and I was working in Berlin at a tech company, and then happened to find a job ad for a startup within the government, which sounded really fascinating because I'd never heard of such a thing before, and it happened to be in Estonia, and it was a country I frankly didn't know much about. I had been there for about 24 hours once on a road trip 10 years prior, and so I found it really intriguing. I applied, and they ended up taking me, and so I moved to Tallinn, where I led business development for the e-residency program, which was one of their kind of flagship digital initiatives. And then, long story short, a couple of years later, I moved back to the U.S. and ended up working as a tech fellow, first via Tech Congress, and then via Horizon, working in the Senate on tech policy issues.
So, again, with background, especially for me, I was doing a 7th grade book report on Estonia, what would I say? Where is it on the map? What's its basic history? What language do they speak? Those sorts of things.
Yeah. No, great question. It's so Estonia is kind of a northern European. It borders Russia on one side. It's got Latvia to the south of it, and right across the bay is Finland, who is I think not the newest NATO ally, but one of the newest NATO allies. So when you think about Estonia, I think it's important to remember that it's a country of only 1.3 million people or so. The country is Estonian. However, the amount of English spoken is incredible. I mean, for better or for worse, I lived in Tallinn for quite some time, and I think I still only know 2 or 3 words of Estonian because literally everyone spoke English, and it was so easy to get around. Excuse me. And I think one thing I'd mention about the culture is that its proximity to Finland, including during the days of the Iron Curtain, have really been important for it because during the Iron Curtain days when much of the Soviet Union was kind of blocked off from the West, Estonia was close enough to Finland that even things like broadcast of American TV shows like Dallas and Dynasty kind of made their way over there. So it had a little bit closer cultural connection to the West than some other places, and I think I and many other folks would consider it very much a kind of Nordic country in terms of temperament and yeah.
And we talked about, I mentioned re-independence. When did that happen? Why are we calling it re-independence?
Yeah, no, that's a great flag because I think many people talk about independence, from the Soviet Union in the early '90s, but the country did briefly gain independence in the early 1900s for a couple of years, and then basically was reoccupied by the Germans and the Soviets and these folks during kind of the world wars, and so. Their re-independence is the period starting after the fall of the Soviet Union when they gain their new and God willing final independence.
Okay, and so you talked a little bit about Estonian culture there. Uh, Estonia also has this strong tradition of technology innovation, which you mentioned, and that's what draws your interest, I think, to it. And where does that history come from?
Yeah, so Estonia has been quite a player when it comes to technology in a bunch of different fields. So they're probably best known for their role in Skype, which was hugely made by Estonian engineering talent, actually kind of developing the platform and technology infrastructure that powered Skype and building it out, as well as unicorn tech companies like Bolt and Pipedrive today. Um, but I think where it comes from is basically, in the early 90s, and actually before then, there was a cybernetics institute at a local university that had focused on computing, and basically after independence, the government and the private sector were looking at ways that the country could become competitive in a global world, in a place where they would actually have a playing field that they could really compete on compared to much bigger countries and geographies that would be easier for export markets, or that had huge amounts of natural resources, which Estonia lacks. And so they really focused on IT and things like cybersecurity and startups, which helped to kind of create this virtuous cycle of both a lot of innovation in the government ecosystem, and they're one of the countries best known for their work in kind of e-governance or digital government, where 99% or so of government services are digitized, as well as the startup ecosystem. And there's a lot of back and forth between the two groups, and I think that's partially also part of their secret sauce. I mean, for one, it's a small country, so there's going to be a lot of overlap anyways, but it's really important to understand about Estonia just how much back and forth between the government and the private sector ecosystem there is when it comes from everything from tech to defense to general government IT work.
And there's probably, like we always think of with Germany, former Soviet Union, strong math and science educational tradition
Yeah,
as well. Am I right about that?
absolutely, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so, do we run into? I'm just curious now. Will I run into a lot of Estonian grad students walking around uh, U.S. universities at this point, or is that not a thing?
Yeah, I think you probably will. Although, just because the country is so small in terms of like absolute population numbers, it's probably dwarfed by other folks. So it might be, there might be a high ratio, in terms of per capita that you run into folks, but in absolute terms, it might be relatively low. But there are very strong bastions, I think, especially at a place like Stanford. I think uh, former President Ilves was actually was a professor there for some time, and I know that they have a great collection of Estonian historical resources at the Stanford Library and do a lot of work. But I think New York and Silicon Valley are kind of two of the bastions of Estonian diaspora, in part because of their connection to the tech community. I think there's I think you may be surprised walking around universities. I think you'll be more surprised walking around Silicon Valley how many Estonians you run into.
So, for the purposes of this conversation, then let's talk about Estonia. Estonia is one of the newer members of NATO. When did that happen? And maybe talk about what role is that in NATO membership playing, in their helping to develop emerging technology.
So Estonia joined NATO in 2004, and I think that probably most important for both it and the impact on NATO is just how much it has become a contributor in terms of cybersecurity, in particular. So they're the host of the CCD COE, which is essentially the cybersecurity center of excellence for all of NATO that kind of helps to do trainings and as well as exercises when it comes to the cyber realm. And part of that comes from a cyber attack that basically was inflicted upon Estonia after a geopolitical incident. Involving the removal of some Soviet-era statues in the capital, and the country basically worked together to respond to fight against that cyber attack that had some pretty serious consequences for the country. And it also served to highlight at a time, I know cyber is now very clearly an area of defense and something that many folks are focused on and worried about, but rewinding back to 2007, that was definitely not so much of the case. So I think at the time it definitely emphasized the importance of cyber as a role in national security, and Estonia kind of being at the front line of this was an obvious pick to lead this CCD COE and become a hub for that knowledge. But I would also mention that because of its role just generally in the tech community, it also kind of has a privileged position in it, exporting innovation and exporting technological advances to the rest of the EU, and kind of serving as one of the early adopter nations for various technologies, as well as, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, a place where things happen first. And when I say that, I'm thinking about the negative in terms of things like cyber attacks, which now we're seeing in Ukraine, of course. But for a long time, Estonia was a place where you could kind of see where foreign malign influence and activities were happening, and what might be exported to other nations in NATO and across the world.
And so you use the acronym CCD COE, that I think is Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. It's a NATO organization that people can look up. We can drop a link to it in the text box underneath this video. Another acronym in the NATO technology context is DIANA. Tell me what DIANA is and how is it working with Estonia today?
Yeah, so DIANA is is a ecosystem of accelerators across the NATO alliance. I think they've got something like 23 accelerators now, basically looking at sourcing important technologies and supporting startups in the ecosystem that will help NATO and the alliance with their collective defense. And so within Estonia, at the Technopole startup incubator, they have the NATO DIANA program, and I think they've run one cohort now. They may have run a second one, basically supporting local and other defense and dual use companies, and helping them grow a little bit into building products and solutions for NATO's collective defense that will be helpful. Because I'm sure you've talked about this a lot with your members, but there's kind of this valley of death and a very difficult situation for that many startups face when they're building dual use or defense focused products. So I think the NATO DIANA Accelerator was an acknowledgement of that and trying to close that gap and support startups in this journey, especially at the earliest phases, and kind of build them up into companies that could really support the NATO mission.
And the focus of the brief paper that you're writing with ETI, and I think for the larger book that you're working on and soon to come out, is that Estonia is actually an interesting case study for what you're talking about, right? On the the development of dual-use technologies, the integration of the civilian and military industries, and the deployment of technologies for both defense and civilian missions. So what's so special about Estonia?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is this, historical precedent of how much the country has been focused on technology in general, and I think we're seeing an increasing convergence of technology, from AI to cyber that have dual use applications that are on one side are used in consumer settings and on one side are used in in defense settings. And so I think that because of that history, Estonia has been very well set up to basically bridge that gap. But the other thing I'd mention is that, frankly and unfortunately, necessity is the mother of all invention. And I think that Estonia, because of its geographical position, and a long history of repeated occupations, it has a very strong culture of building things that matter and focusing. They're not building AI for the sake of AI. They're building solutions that will make a material difference for their defense. And I think that really stands out. It's also a very pragmatic culture in terms of what they invest in and what they build. So I think the forces of history have created this situation, as well as this culture of pragmatism and a strong value of independence and democratic values has kind of created this situation.
And so now that's something that the United States is thinking about. People on the Hill where we were, people in the Pentagon, people in industry as well. This sort of, how do we bring together those two cultures, sets of capabilities, paces of life,
Yeah.
and business models and other things together for the best benefit of both the civilian missions and the defense mission. So as you've looked at Estonia, what do you think are some of the lessons learned that we can maybe copy as we try to accelerate integration of the civil and military technological complexes?
Yeah, and I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to folks like DIU, which I think are taking great strides to kind of bridge that gap already and kind of bring these two ecosystems together. And I think more initiatives like that are fantastic. One of the things that I think Estonia does really well is this crossover in public-private collaboration and frequent interaction. And I think I really want to emphasize how important it is to have frequent crossovers and just to create that mutual basis of understanding and speaking the same language, because frankly, the startup world and the DoD world do speak very different languages, and so just having more crossover there, as well as making folks more accessible on the government side, I think is very important. So one of the things that you find about Estonia is that folks are very accessible. Many people have talked about being able to text or email the prime minister, and I have happened to do that for a former prime minister, and I cold emailed him and he responded to me. And so I would just say I don't expect former President Obama or Trump to answer a random cold email, but for DoD officials that want to do more work with innovative startups, or that I would say increasing accessibility and tightening the amount of time that it takes for communication is definitely key. Within the report that we've developed, there's also a couple other key lessons that we talk about, drawn from Estonia's defense technology ecosystem. And the other one that I'd like to highlight is just the importance, and this is somewhat similar, but I think it's important to call it out, of the importance of public-private collaboration. So Estonia is quite unique in that part of its defense, and this goes back to the '07 cyber attack, is that they have used volunteer cyber actors within kind of their defense ecosystem to help bolster their collective defense, because frankly the government can't always go it alone. And so I think that the U.S. should take a lesson from this as it looks for ways to collaborate with the private sector. It's not just about contracts. It's also about building other connections and bridges to the private sector, to universities, and helping people find ways to get involved in potentially lower barrier ways than enlisting or building a defense startup or joining a prime.
Yeah, I'm curious that with that integration, one of the things we run across here is this issue of classifying information that relates to defense, relates to security. Um, how does a country like that, like Estonia, of that size, handle those kinds of issues? Who gets to see what, especially when they're
Yeah.
so interested in the cyber threat world?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just I can't speak too much to the classification system and how they manage the security exactly, but I think there is a stronger uh, focus on making sure that it's not just public sector actors who have access to key information, and that private sector folks may have a role in the public sector. And I assume that comes with some level of scrutiny from the security and intelligence services to make sure that information isn't going out. But I think there just is a broader acceptance of making sure that the private sector is involved in these decisions, because for a country like Estonia, where you're small enough that you really need everybody to be in on it and be aligned, from the companies to individual actors. And so I think that just partially out of necessity, they make sure to work with folks. And I'd shout out, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, but Capo puts out a great report every year um, on security threats that I highly recommend for folks if they're interested in this. And it's a very revealing and insightful look into how Estonia deals with their domestic security.
We've talked a lot about the cyber world, but Estonia's got companies working in other spaces as well. Do you want to highlight a couple of the other companies that are working in the national security space?
Absolutely. So the first one will be maybe a surprise for folks, but I want to highlight Skeleton Technologies, which does supercapacitors. And I apologize, I'm going to mess up some of the technical details. You can tell I'm not an engineer here, but basically they develop energy storage solutions. I would also like to shout out the e-governance academy, which I think does really interesting work supporting countries who are interested in building e-government and digital government solutions, because I think that's a very underrated part of national security, is basically your ability to respond, your ability to continue functioning as a government. And I think we see that in Ukraine, for instance, where the DIA application has played such a prominent role in supporting citizens and supporting Ukrainians as the war progresses. And then I'd also shout out Milrem, which does some very interesting work with robotics, and they have actually had a bounty placed on some of their technology for its role in the battlefield. For folks interested, the Estonian Defense and Aerospace Industry Association represents most of the companies who are active in the defense space, including many dual use folks in the tech sector. And I would highly recommend folks kind of look at their website and see who are members. But I would also remark that there are tons of very early stage companies and founders fiddling with stuff and building solutions just because they want to be patriotic, and they see the frankly existential nature of the conflict going on in another former occupied territory, and they want to be supportive there, but also make sure that Estonia is defended.
And for government organizations or industry organizations that want to partner with 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 Estonia, including our universities, what are some ideas that you might have to establish some of those partnerships?
Yeah, I definitely, I think a great first stop is the Estonia Briefing Center, which kind of serves as this initial checkpoint or starter area for many folks, and they can basically help support both universities, companies, even nation states who are interested in kind of figuring out what's happening across the Estonian ecosystem, and kind of point folks in the guide and develop a unique set of connections for folks to take.
And when I think one of the other things that you talked about in the report, which you touched on a little bit there, is that it turns out Estonia is also a supplier of technologies or services. So what's an example that it turns out they're exporting government services? You mentioned it in one context, but what are the kinds of services that are exporting? Who are they exporting to? Why is that important for us for a nation like Estonia?
Yeah. So I'd say, there's companies like, Nortel, Guardtime, Digital Nation, Cybernetica that are kind of, building cyber and governance solutions for countries as diverse as, Benin, Ukraine, Japan, and including building solutions for the U.S. But I'd also mention the International Center for Defense and Research, which had a great report that talked about the work that Cybernetica, which has been called the grandfather of Estonia's cybersecurity sector, although they're still quite fast moving and innovative in my opinion, and they have been working with the U.S. government in on a contract with the Office of Naval Research to develop cryptographically secure AI systems, for instance. So there's a lot of intersection with Estonian companies and American companies. Again, in part because there's already a ton of crossover between Estonian entrepreneurs and the U.S. Tech ecosystem. Because frankly, Estonia is quite a small market, so their entrepreneurs are very focused on building into larger markets, and the U.S. is an obvious one, in part because of the cultural connections, the links to Silicon Valley that have been built up over the last 30 some years, and because of the high level of English spoken. So it's definitely a place that is relatively easy for, in my opinion, for American investors, American tech folks to go over there and feel pretty at home in their tech community.
And it's interesting when we think about international collaboration in the defense space, we usually start by thinking about the deployed operational forces, how they're going to be interoperating, how they're going to be supported logistically, communicate with each other, those kinds of issues. And we sort of work partnerships backwards from that, from the pointy end of the spear. I wonder, you can disagree with me, whether in this case, maybe we should be thinking about some of these partner nations as first part of our technology innovation industrial base, and then from there move to the sort of operational end of the spectrum. But we more think of it as a technology partnership rather than a military operational partnership.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to think about it. Is that, I mean, especially if you're looking for early stage innovative solutions, thinking about it as a technology hub that's going to be innovating at the front lines, because the deep connections to Ukraine, where a ton of innovation is happening, again out of necessity, as well as frankly their deep concerns over the future of their nation, and concerns over potential reoccupation, is driving a huge amount of innovation and activity in the sector. So I think if you're an American company or university or anything like that, I think stopping in Estonia and considering it a potential partner for innovation, and looking to them not just as a potential deployer of American technology, but as a place that can actually help build early stage solutions, and become a thought partner, is definitely the right frame of mind.
So now, harkening back to your Capitol Hill days, there's always barriers, policy barriers, political barriers for trying to do this technology cooperation. So what's one of the big ones that's getting in the way of working more closely with Estonia, and what are people trying to do about
Yeah, I think Estonia has done a great job, and many folks in the Baltic Caucus, for instance, or folks focused on the Nordics, have done a great job in forging connections with Estonia, and kind of understanding what the country has to offer. But I think sometimes it does get frankly, just because of its size, overshadowed by larger neighbors, and other folks that have bigger ecosystems, and potentially larger voices in conversation. So I think for what folks can do to increase that collaboration on the Estonian side and the U.S. side, I think just understanding the potential for Estonia as a real change maker and innovator, because they have demonstrated over and over in the tech ecosystem. They're already building very interesting stuff on the cyber and robotics and autonomy realm. And I think we'd be remiss not to look at them as a very as a very important partner as we kind of move into this next phase of the future of warfare. And I don't want to pontificate and be the armchair expert on this, but I think many more folks are focused on drones and AI and robotics and looking at these solutions, and that those are areas where I think Estonia would excel.
That's great. So the report that Joel worked with us on Estonia is going to be called "How the EU's E-State Thinks About Defense Tech Inside Estonia." That should be coming out very shortly, available on ETI's website. Uh, Joel, the book that you're working on, when is that going to come out? Where can people find it? Do you have the title yet? What can you tell us?
So it's still a tentative title, so don't be surprised if it changed. But it's Rebooting a Nation, and it should be coming out early next year. And if folks are interested in following, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and I'm happy to stay in touch.
Yeah, and we'll drop in links to all of those different valuable organizations and reports that you mentioned in the text box here. And so, with that, I want to thank Joel for joining us on the podcast today. Thanks a lot, Joel.
Of course, thanks so much for having me.
And I wanted to mention to everyone, please visit NDIA and ETI's website to sign up for our mailing list and register for our various webinars, events, and educational offerings, including our Tech 101 series. Some of the upcoming events are a Tech 101 overview of power beaming that's happening on September 18th. A couple of major NDIA events, the Women in Defense Conference, September 24th in Arlington, the Future Forces Conference down in Norfolk, Virginia. That's the week of September 24th to 27th. ETI and the MITRE Corporation are working on a workshop on the use of AI to support the acquisition workforce. That's coming up in mid-October, on October 18th. All information on all of those things is available on NDIA and ETI's website. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to stay up to date with all of our latest content. Special thank you to Melanie Yu and Daniel Park for producing this episode. Please, everyone, send your comments and ideas for future podcast topics and episodes. Thanks again to Joel for joining us today. And thank you so much for tuning in to Emerging Tech Horizons.